Chapter 3, Handful. Now, one thing that I've noticed yesterday when I was reading, I get super excited. So what I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to use a little guide right here as I'm reading, and hopefully that's going to help me read through it a little bit more clearly. And it's just one way that I use that actually really helps me. So Chapter 3, Handful. Over the summer, there was a big meeting about me at school. Mom came home very serious and sent me to my room while she read my file. After she read it, she opened my door and sat down on the edge of my bed. She said I should have been kept behind and given extra help, but no teacher wanted to risk getting me 2 years in a row. I guess I can't blame him, she sighed. You are a handful at times. I don't get how they think I'm such a pain, I said to her. And I didn't, because most of the time I wasn't even in the classroom. I was in the principal's office, or with the nurse, or was helping out with the library or a cafeteria, or I was running laps out on the playground. It wasn't like I was a pain all day long. Like when it rained, all the teachers asked me to run out to the parking lot and roll up their windows. I didn't hear them complain when I came back in dripping wet, or if the stack of new supplies was dropped off. I was in the office. Then I always helped move them into the store and received an awesome kid stamp on my hand, not a pain in the neck kid stamp. Plus, I was famous for snatching flies right out of the air and killing all the classroom spiders and making sure the white mice were always in their cage. I'll bet helpful things like that were not written down in my file. I know I'm not perfect, but I don't think it was fair that they told me one thing and wrote down another. Hearing stuff like that makes me sad, I said to Mom. Well, it should, she replied. But this year we can start over. The school wants me to take you down to the doctor and get you fixed up. Then she reached out and grabbed me and kissed me all over my face, and I had to close my eyelids. Otherwise, she would have kissed me right on the eyeballs. Miss Maxey had also read my file. When I arrived in her class, she assigned me my seat and said that she was going to give me a fair chance to show just how good I could be. And all that first day, she kept glancing over me with the I got my eye on you look. I was used to people keeping their eye on me, especially after last year, when a special counselor came and followed me around everywhere. He gave me tests and kept sending me reports home to Grandma, which she called junk mail and threw in the trash. I had taken my special meds at breakfast, and they were working good, so I was mostly sitting still, looking right back in Miss Maxey's eyes, shouting the answers when we did our math drills. Before lunch, my seat felt like any old hard seat, and I felt like any old kid. But after lunch, I felt as if I was sitting on a giant spring, and all I could do was to keep it from launching me head first into the ceiling. My morning pill was supposed to last all day, but it gave out on me. I gripped the bottom of my chair and I held tight, and I watched the second hand of the clock sweep around and around. And it wasn't that important. It wasn't that the important stuff Miss Moxie had to say went in one ear and out the other. It was that it didn't go in at all. It just bounced off. And when the bell rang, I loosened my grip and I blasted for the door. But Miss Boxy was waiting for me. Not so fast, Joey, she said, and she snagged the back of my shirt collars as I ran by. We need to talk. That's when she sat me back down and told me about her rules. I had to stay in my seat, she said. No running, jumping, or kicking. Keep my hands on top of my desk. I wasn't allowed to look over my shoulder. No touching the person in front of me. No fidgeting or no drawing on myself. And I absolutely wasn't allowed to say anything until I raised my hand and I was called on. She had all the rules printed out on a little white note card. Now, these are my basic rules, she said to me, and then taped them firmly to the upper corner of my desktop. They'd apply to everyone in the classroom. I make no exceptions. So you can work by these rules and keep your mind on your studies, then you and I will not have any problems. The problem was, I wasn't listening. She had that bright red nail polish on. I couldn't keep my eyes off the way her fingers tapped on the desktop and was leaving tiny half-moon dents in the wood. And the next day, I sure didn't remember a thing she said. And by lunchtime, my meds had worn off again, and I was spinning around my chair like I was a Mad Hatter's teacup ride at the church carnival. Joey, said Miss Moxie, will you come up to my desk, please? I did, and I stood before her, hopping from one foot to another. You're losing it, Joey, she whispered. Then she set down one hand on my shoulder and settle me down. Remember the rules. Rules? I asked, kind of lost. Didn't we talk yesterday? She asked. I'm a little antsy, and I get this way. I need to do stuff. My grandma said My grandma used to give me a broom and make me sweep the sidewalk all the way around the block. Miss Maxie shook her head back and forth. Well, we already have a janitor, she said, but I've got something you can help me with. She gave me a box of used pencils to sharpen. Everyone else was doing old social studies handouts about presidents. When I got to skip it and just sharpen pencils, our class presidents, Maria Dombrowski, gave me a look. I figured she was jealous because in less than a week I was already the teacher's pet and got to do all the fun stuff. I just crossed my eyes and I kept going. I stuck the first pencil in the sharpener and began to turn the crank. I loved the sound of wood and lead being ground down. I lowered my nose over the sharpener and sniffed the clean smell of wood shaving. Which smelled like the inside of my mom's blanket chest where I used to hide from Grandma and then pop up to scare her bloodless. I just kept turning the crank and pushing the pencil, and finally I had it ground down to an inch above the eraser. I pulled it out and checked the tip, sharp as a needle. I put it in the box and got another, and I began to grind it down. And when I finished, I found a couple of pieces of chalk, and I sharpened those down so that I stuck the flat end up against my upper lip and my gum, and they hung down like fangs. Then I saw some popsicle sticks in the art cart that we used to make paper puppets. I made sure Miss Moxie wasn't looking. Then I grabbed one, I stuck it in the sharpener. I began to turn the crank, but it didn't turn so well, and finally it jammed up, and I couldn't get the stick out. I nervously glanced at Miss Moxie, and luckily she was busy stapling all the president said on the bulletin board. I yanked the stick again, but it was stuck real good. I only ended up with splinters in my hand. I wrapped the bottom of my Pittsburgh Penguins hockey jersey around it, and I tugged with one hand and turned the crank with the other. The stick came loose, and I stumbled back against the empty desk. My fangs fell out and rolled across the floor in pieces. Miss Moxie looked over at me, and so did everyone else. Joey, is there a problem? The question made me feel jittery. I picked up my fangs and I stood real still. No, Miss Moxie, no problem, I said in a small mouse voice. She nodded, then turned her back on me. But Maria kept frowning at me, and she pulled out a little pad on her desk and wrote down 4 letters. I couldn't see, but I figured it spelled Joey. As class president, it was Maria's job to make sure everybody had good behavior, or Miss Moxie would take minutes off our recess time. Brown noser, I thought, then forgot all about her. The sharpener had a bunch of holes in different sized pencils, like a regular hole for number 2 pencils. Then you turn the dial, there's a bigger hole for thicker pencils, and even a hole big enough for one of those giant clown pencils that were about as thick as my little finger. Mom said I needed to cut my long fingernails back because I was scratching myself all up in my sleep. Plus, I thought it'd be cool to grind my nails down to sharp points and look like a vampire. So I stuck my little finger in there and I gave it a good turn, but instantly I jerked it out and started shrieking. Miss Moxie turned around and ran towards me. I slipped, I hollered. It was an accident. Let me see that, she said, and grabbed my hand. I held up my little finger in the air, and it was a little scratched up and bloody on the tip, but the nail had been yanked over to one side and was just hanging there, like when you peel the shell off a shrimp. It doesn't hurt, I said, trying to keep my hand away from her and shove it down in my pocket where no one could see. It's okay. The next thing I knew, Miss Moxie had a wad of tissues wrapped around my finger, and she held it tightly with one hand and told me that it was going to be all right. And she held my elbow with the other to settle me down, because by then I was swinging around and slapping at my leg with my free hand as if red ants were biting me all over. It's not good to hurt ourselves, she said calmly. I was just playing vampire, I explained. She took me directly to Nurse Holyfield, who said she'd seen worse and not to worry. Other kids had done the same thing. She fixed me up with a big white bandage wrapped around my finger so that it looked like a stick with a huge wad of cotton candy on the end. The nail will fall off, she said, but don't worry, you'll grow another one. Is there a fingernail fairy? I asked her. Because if there is, I'll put it on my pillow and I'll get $1. She smiled at me and glanced up at Miss Moxie and nodded like they both knew something about me. I didn't know. People were always giving each other secret looks around me, but I didn't care. I had private thoughts of my own, and I didn't share with them, so it made us even. After class that day, Miss Moxie was waiting for me at the door. We have to have another talk, she said. Let's sit down. I stared at her because I wasn't sure what to talk about, and if I started talking first, it could be about anything, so I waited, and she went up first. Joey, You have to listen to me carefully, she said in a calm radio voice. I want to help you, but you have to help yourself too. Today, you hurt yourself. It was an accident, I shouted, and I jumped to my feet, but she put her hands on my shoulder and slowly pressed me back down in the chair. But you did it, she said. Other kids will not have, and this is my concern. That you don't know what will hurt you or not, and no one at school wants to see you hurt. And she stopped for a moment to be real careful, and no one at school wants to be hurt by you. I wouldn't hurt anyone, I said. Not intentionally, she replied. Not on purpose. But we have to make sure you don't. I don't know why I couldn't listen to her. She talked some more about the dangers of hurting people, and it was as if all her words were crowded up together in a long line of letters and sounds that just didn't make any sense. It was more like listening to circus music than talk. Joey, she said, you need to know that there are limits in the classroom. And if you can't live by the class rules, then we'll have to send you down to the special ed class for extra help. We've talked to your mom about this. Okay, I said, only saying the word because agreeing to stuff was the best way to make it stop. Okay, I repeated. I get it. But I didn't get it because the special ed was new and I didn't even know what that was yet. Please do get it, she said. We all want to keep you going in the right direction. My mom returned home from work. I told her about the day and showed her my finger. She sighed, pulled her hair back in a ponytail, and snapped a rubber band around it. Let me see, she said, and she unwrapped my bandage. While she looked at my finger, I looked at her face, which turned sad. It's going to be okay, she whispered, as if loud talk would make it hurt. I think so too, I whispered back. Then very carefully she rewrapped my fingers. Did you get in trouble? She asked. Not really, I replied. The nurse said it was no big deal. Good boy, she said, and then gave me an air kiss. Now, mix my medicine. The beauty parlor was a zoo today. I ran over to the kitchen cabinet and got the jug bottle of amaretto with a red $23.99 price sticker right on the paper label. Mom had been calling it her medicine ever since I got my medicine. I think in the beginning she called it that so I would not feel bad about having to take something to make me feel better. Like we had something in common because, as she said, her medicine makes her feel better too. I first got my meds after Mom had her school meeting and took me to the clinic. I spoke with a doctor and who had a lot of forms and asked me questions like, can you do homework while watching TV? And during dinner, can you keep your napkin on your lap? Then he gave me a Rubik's Cube and timed how long I played with it until I gave up. He wanted to know how I felt when other kids called me names, and I asked him how he knew that other kids were calling me names. He said he was just guessing, and I told him some kids in our street called me Zippy because I was skinny and hyper, and other names too I didn't like. Then he spoke with my mom for a long time and made her fill out all the forms. But we must have passed the test because afterwards we went directly to the pharmacy. And while I waited for the prescription to be filled, I picked the cotton stuffing out of an old padded chair. By the time Mom gathered her things up and paid for the big bottle of pills, I had hidden all the cotton in my pants, which made me bunchy around the middle, like a lumpy scarecrow. All the way home in the car Mom had borrowed, I kept picking it out of a tiny hole I had worked in my pocket and slowly tossed it out the window. By the time I got home, I was so scared because I would have thought the pharmacist would discover a skinny chair and follow the little wads of cotton to my house like when Hansel and Gretel first made a trail home with breadcrumbs. I was so afraid I told Mom what I was thinking, and she held my cheeks in both hands and kissed me on my face and said, "Don't worry so much. Now let's get you some medicine." She put the pill in my hand and a glass of water in the other, but before I take my pill, she said, "Just hold on 1 minute more." She got a bottle of amaretto and mixed it with some Mountain Dew, and then she said, "See, Mommy has her own meds. It comes in a bottle." Then we clinked glasses and I took my pill. I was so happy to take it. I could feel it going down my throat like a little white round superhero pill on its way to beat up all the bad stuff in me, especially bad stuff in me. Everyone said it would help, and it did. The first day I felt quiet as a lamb, and I went to bed early, and I didn't wake up until the next morning by 10. By then, Mom had already gone to the beauty parlor and left me with a pill and a note telling me to just stay indoors all day. So I stayed home, and I felt like a normal kid for a while. But then my old self started to sneak up on me. After watching Wheel of Fortune and a Simpsons rerun on TV, I got up and made a huge peanut butter mess in the kitchen. And when Mom came home, she freaked and gave me another pill. But already it didn't work so good, and I could hardly sleep that night. In fact, after the first day, the pills only worked on and off. I never knew which it was going to be, peace or consequences, Mom had called it. She phoned the clinic and the doctor said it was because I was going through extra early puberty. So my blood was half boy and half man, and the medicine worked good on the boy and not so good on the man. I told that to Nurse Holyfield today when she was fixing my finger, and she said that was pure nonsense. And the problem was we were given cheap medication, and some of it worked, and some of them were duds. So when I finished mixing Mom's drink, I put the amaretto away and carefully carried the drink to her. She tasted it and then said, "Joey, if you slip any more, school just might let you slip away like water down a drain, and class will continue as if you never existed." "Is that what happened to Grandma?" I asked. "Not quite. As it turns out, your dad was in town, and Grandma decided it was easier to live where she could do whatever she wanted and nobody would care, so she's back in Pittsburgh with him." "I hope she's okay." "Don't worry about your Grandma. She's tough as an old whipped leather and just might crack some sense into your dad." She smiled after she said that.